I'm Hal Meng. I'm the Executive Director and Chief Instructor with the Center for Food Preservation Arts. The center is founded on the belief that the traditional practice of preserving food in community settings creates resilience in communities. At this time of year, when crops are starting to come to market and gardens are beginning to produce, we would be working in groups in what we call stocking the pantry. But the current COVID-19 lockdowns has made our ability to work in groups limited. So this year we're creating a series of posts, videos, PowerPoints, and articles on our social media and also on the social media here at the Defiance-Ruston Senior Center to teach techniques for preserving at home individually or in small groups. So welcome to our first virtual canning party. In this session, we're introducing dehydrating, one of the oldest and most economical techniques for preserving. So why dehydrate? When we think of preserving, a lot of time we think of canning or freezing. Well, this is a quick overview, but at the end we have links to more in-depth articles about dehydrating, comparing it to other techniques. Dehydrating removes all the available water, and bacteria and molds need active water to be able to grow. It also preserves most of the flavor and nutrients, and storage doesn't require energy like freezing, and it takes a lot less room to store. The USDA says that properly prepared and stored fruit can last with full nutritional value for up to 5 years, vegetables up to 10. And as you can see, this represents 2.5 pounds of carrots. Good color, flavor, and they are still well dehydrated because they're crisp. This is what's left of my leek crop from last year. I have no idea how many pounds it was, but as you can see, they're all chopped and ready to go. So what are we going to be dehydrating today? What is in season is rhubarb. Rhubarb comes into season here in the Puget Sound area between April and August. Most of the rhubarb eaten in the United States is still grown in this area. Now, rhubarb is actually a vegetable, and the earliest records of its being used are the Chinese about 4,500 years ago. When it was finally introduced to Europe, the Europeans thought it was poisonous. But the only part of it that is poisonous are the leaves. It's just the bitter taste because both the leaves and the stalks themselves have oxalic acid in them. So when is it time to begin harvesting rhubarb? Now, most of the time we are, even year-round, able to go to some store or retailers and buy rhubarb. But if you grow it at home, you need to be patient. First of all, it takes a couple of years for it to be established, but also the rhubarb is not ready to be picked until the stem of the leaf, this center part here, or maybe if I show it this way, it'll be better. This center part here is 10 inches or more. And you want to be sure to leave at least a third of the stems over the course of the year. Now, when do you stop harvesting? Well, technically you can harvest all the way into fall, but it's better to slow or stop in late June or early July. This allows the plants time to build up energy. And there are basically two ways to harvest. You can use a knife and cut it off at the bottom, or the way that's usually suggested is to hold fairly far down, pull up, and lean the stalk until it breaks. As you can see, this one has been broken off. What that does is it allows the plant to recover a little more quickly. Now, in the steps for dehydrating or even freezing is you want to harvest your stalks, wash them very thoroughly, because of course they all get some dust and dirt on them being close to the ground. And then it's a good practice to soak it in a solution of 3 parts water to 1 part white vinegar. This helps remove and retard the growth of bacteria, as well as any small particles of dust. And hopefully there are no pesticides, but it will help get rid of some of those. And then you want to cut your rhubarb. So we're going to go ahead and prepare this for dehydrating, but you do basically the same thing with freezing. You're going to be making it in 1/2 inch to 1/4 inch dice. And as always, you want to cup your fingers, use them as a guide. And then you just continue on like that. I like to get it all cut up and then put it on whatever trays it's going to for the dehydrating. And as I was reading some of these recipes, I came across some ideas that I had never seen before, which were to use some of the rhubarb for decorations. So these long strips would be soaked in a light syrup and then dehydrated. Then you could cut them into length. One thing I saw is like a dish of vanilla ice cream with a little sauce on top, and then one of these stuck in for decoration. And so the way you would do those is just using a peeler like this. Now, if you're going to get really fancy, and this is a lot of work, but you can use a zester and go down and make these really fine. Now these, you probably wouldn't want to dehydrate a lot, or there wouldn't be much left of them. But especially if you just stick with the red part, it makes a very lovely, sometimes very lovely decoration. Now, after you've gotten it cut into whatever shape you need, remember that the rhubarb is technically a vegetable. So that if you want to do everything you can to preserve the color when it's dehydrated or frozen, you'd want to pre-treat it by blanching it for a minute or 2. But because of the high acid content of the rhubarb anyway, it's not necessary for preservation. You can just freeze it directly or dehydrate it. So now we're getting to my favorite part, the actual dehydrating. Although I do like cutting up the produce for it, especially the funny shapes. Well, how long do you have to leave it in whatever you're using for dehydrating? That depends entirely on the type of dehydrator you're using, the weather conditions, and how much water starts out originally in the produce. So it's more of an art than a science. And that's why it gives us some of the books that give you recipes and links that we have with instructions talk about X amount of time, but they always put in a proviso, start checking the product at this time. So as you saw with the carrots, they need to be dry and crisp with no moisture inside. And always err on the side of over-drying if in doubt. So this is the Excalibur. So this is the 9-tray Excalibur dehydrator. I've had this one for almost 10 years, and I probably use it at least every other week throughout the year, and during harvest season, I probably use it every day. I like it as opposed to some of the other round ones because the heat source is in the back, and the fan is in the back, so the heated air flows across every tray equally. As you can see in this one, there are 9 different trays, and so that's a lot of square footage of drying space. It comes with some extra things, like these Teflon sheets, when you want to be making things like fruit leathers and even vegetable leathers, and we'll explore all of those in another session later. Because they're very useful for when you're backpacking meals or emergency meals, your own meals ready to eat kind of things. So with this, you want to be sure to spread the produce out. You have it all cut. If you're treating it, like with apples, you're going to want to pre-treat those with an acid, like ascorbic acid or lemon juice, to keep them from browning as they dry. And you want to try and spread them out so they're not stacked on each other. Up on top, which you probably can't see, are 2 dials, where you can set the temperature anywhere from 95 degrees to this one. It goes to 155 on these. Anything higher than that actually starts cooking instead of dehydrating. So with this, with the rhubarb in here, you're going to set it for 8 to 12 hours. If you're going to buy a new dehydrator, I'd strongly suggest that you get one that has the timer on it. This goes up to 24 hours. But if it says a range of like 8 to 12 hours, no later than 8 hours do you want to start checking to make sure. Because like I said, a lot of it is an art, and it varies by the weather condition. So you want them crisp, and you want to be able, when you break a piece open, that there's no moisture inside. Now, the advantage of it blowing straight across is that it's fairly even, but I like to halfway through, like at the 4-hour mark, take the tray out and rotate it 180 degrees. Other dehydrators, and lots of people have seen the circular ones, those have the heat coming, the majority of them, from the bottom up. There are a few still that come from the top down. But either way, it hits one set of trays before the others. So that's a constant. They suggest every 45 minutes to an hour that you rotate all the trays. This is a lot simpler and easier. Now, people will say, what if I don't have a dehydrator and I don't want to purchase one right now? There are some groups, like we do have a few dehydrators that under special circumstances we will loan out. But you can also use an oven. But the problem goes back to where we talked about that you want to stay below 155. And the majority of ovens, unless they have a warmer underneath, start at like 175. Now, that can work. You have to be very sure to keep an eye on it. But what you would do with those is basically the same thing in terms of the trays. You're going to want to spread it out on a tray and they suggest you use a non-stick mat. I just noticed that the Amazon Basics logo is up on this. I'm not specifically endorsing them, but they come in nice sets, these silicone sheets. You really do want to do something if you're using an oven, because you don't want to spray it with an oil to get it release, because oils, when on dehydrated things, will go rancid, which is why it's really complicated to make jerky, is you need to work around that oil, around that fat, so it won't go rancid. So these kind of sheets work really well for that. And this is, it depends on how much you really want to dehydrate in your oven. But if you can get a very accurate oven thermometer, you're going to spend a lot of time turning the oven on for a while. When it reaches a temperature, you're going to turn it off, and then turn it back on, turn it off. But it is possible, and I've done it that way. So in either method of drying, you're going to want to do at the end a post-treatment. It's where you allow the moisture, because there'll always be a small amount that's still present, to spread throughout the entire product, and then you test it and see. And if it is too flexible or it has moisture inside, you re-dry the whole thing. But then you know it's even. And the way you do that, with the oven product, you would take it and put it in a jar, close it up, leave it for 24 hours. The dehydrator, you just turn it off and leave it for about 12 to 24 hours, letting it sit overnight. When you're storing it, your product, the most essential part is that no air or moisture can get to it, and that you keep it cool, under 70 degrees and out of direct light. If you're keeping things for less than a year, if you're planning on using them up within a year, there are several sources that suggest that you can use any airtight container, including freezer bags, if you squeeze any additional air out. But for long-term preservation, you're probably going to want to vacuum pack them with a home vacuum packer. Now this is some rhubarb that I made last year. You can see it's got a nice seal, and the seal is a year old. And these are not that expensive, but we also have some that we would loan out under special circumstances. If you're going to make a lot, like I do dried beans for putting in soups and stews and things, and they're in big vacuum packs, you're probably going to want to invest in an oxygen absorber. Those are little packets that do exactly what they are. They're basically a form of iron filings, sealed up, except for moisture gets through into them. And you put it inside, you seal it up, and it draws out any moisture that might be left, or if there's a tiny hole, it will slow that down. And basically what it does is cause the iron in the packets to rust. So at the end of the presentation here, we've got a number of links to sites that have recipes, that have different approaches. And so I hope that you'll get out there, and rhubarb is in season right now and it looks beautiful. So grab some and experiment with dehydrating. And thank you, and we look forward to seeing you in our next virtual canning party.